Up until now, Karoline Leavitt has never been frightened by the spotlight. In an instant, nobody anticipated it. Her eyes were watering and her voice was shaking as she stepped in front of the cameras. This time, something was different. Suddenly, the self-assured, vocal person we have come to know was exposed. When she made a startling revelation about her spouse, her emotions were raw. Was it a decision that changed your life, a heartache, or something else entirely? Her statements surprised everyone as the room became quiet. And now, at last, the truth is being revealed. What is this reality? Karoline Leavitt didn't exactly have a normal path to the national scene. She didn't have a clear route or grow up in a political dynasty. She grew up in a family that owned a used vehicle dealership and an ice cream business in a tiny New Hampshire town. However, there was something about Karoline even in those early days. She was ambitious, driven, and didn't hesitate to speak up. As college rolled around, that fire just became more intense. Karoline made headlines, wrote daring op-eds, defended Trump's policies, and even founded her school's first broadcasting club while the majority of students were attempting to pass exams. She wasn't simply another opinionated student. She was ensuring that they were heard, and they were. She immediately entered conservative politics after prominent figures took notice. She worked directly under Kayleigh McEnany at the White House after landing an internship at Fox News. Thereafter, she rose to prominence in political communications as the Director of Communications for Representative Elise Stefanik. Karoline did more than just make her mark in a world where it may be difficult for young voices to be heard. She made sure she couldn't be ignored. We're seeing a different side of her today, though. The tough, self-assured Karoline is crying as she makes a big news about her spouse in front of the cameras. And believe me, nobody anticipated this. Like an incident she went through after winning a fresh election, Karoline's career wasn't without its difficulties. You could really sense the underlying doubt lingering in the air while the press room was humming. Expectations weren't very high as the youngest White House press secretary in history prepared to take the platform. Some assumed she would be cautious, follow the plan, and maybe make a mistake. Others thought she would be anxious and overwhelmed by the situation. Then she took charge. She was obviously not here to follow the old norms as soon as she began talking. The duration of her initial briefing was 47 minutes. By the norms of an opening day, that is a marathon. However, it was more than simply the duration that sparked conversation. It was the way she dealt with it. There were no cleverly phrased non-answers or evading difficult queries. Rather, she confronted the media directly, pointing out their bias, contesting their stories, and making it apparent that she wasn't merely another mouthpiece. She was in charge. Even Peter Alexander from NBC pressed her with challenging questions, maybe thinking she would falter, but she did not. She refused to back down, responding confidently and without once appearing shaken. Expecting inexperience, the doubters had entered. They saw someone who was well-versed in her field instead. Let's go on, this moment was not a coincidence. Long before she ever stood at the platform, she was getting ready for it. She was already studying the game at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire, where she was learning about the relationship between politics and the media. After gaining this information, she was hired as an assistant press secretary in the Trump White House and then rose to the position of national press secretary for his 2024 campaign. She wasn't only a passenger. In one of the most difficult political circumstances, she was learning, adjusting, and establishing herself. But her confidence wasn't the only thing that made her stand out. It was her plan. She saw a change in the media environment. While independent voices, podcasters, social media influencers, and non-traditional journalists were reaching a wider audience than ever before, established news channels were losing ground. She leaned into that shift rather than resisting it. She wasted little time attempting to gain favor with traditional media. She delivered the administration's message directly to the audience on the platforms. A new face at the podium wasn't the only thing at stake here. It concerned a radical change in the White House's public relations strategy. She made it clear right away that she was redefining a position. The same traditional media groups and reporters had been asking the same questions at White House press briefings for years. But everything changed when Leavitt took control. All of a sudden, independent internet voices, podcast hosts, and conservative influencers were seated at the table. It was a startling move to the political establishment. It was only simple sense to her. Traditional news was no longer being seen by millions of Americans. Why, therefore, should the White House disregard them? And her strategy succeeded, whether people liked it or not. The most effective news conference ever was even called by White House Communications Director Stephen Chung. DC went into a frenzy after hearing just one phrase. The previous paradigm, in which the narrative was dominated by the mainstream media, was no longer viable. Not everyone was a fan, of course. Although Leavitt was obviously a contentious choice, her politics weren't the only thing under investigation. She made headlines about her personal life as well. She wed 59-year-old real estate tycoon Nicholas Riccio, who was 32 years her senior. A lot of people had opinions. Was it affection? Was there a plan? It was considered a scandal by some. Others don't give a damn. In any case, she was unfazed by the noise. Her concerns were more significant. Then, the entire universe was turned upside down. July 13, 2024. A Trump rally in Pennsylvania's Butler. It was electric energy. Then there were gunshots. There was anarchy. Donald Trump was shot. Agents from the Secret Service flooded in. Supporters let up a yell. Despite his bleeding, he remained upright. The nation wasn't the only one shaken by the incident. Everything altered as a result. It struck Leavitt on a very new level. That day, she wasn't among the crowd. Washington wasn't even where she was. She was rocking her 3-day-old baby son at home. As if it were just another campaign rally, she had switched it on. Abruptly, she found herself helpless to do anything but remain still as she watched history play out in real time. The video kept playing over and again. Like a freight train, its weight struck her. She was holding this small, delicate life like a new mother. She was a political warrior, nevertheless. She also understood in her heart that this was about more than simply Trump. It has to do with the future. She therefore made a choice that most new mothers would not even think about. "I'm going back 4 days," she remarked, turning to face her spouse. She only gave herself that. She reappeared on film in the battle 4 days after giving birth. The public was taken aback. How was she able to achieve that? Why would she? Her body was still recovering. Her infant had just been born for a week. For Leavitt, however, the solution was straightforward. She then stated that the president almost died defending this nation. Returning to work was the least I could do. Some referred to it as loyalty. It was referred to as lunacy by some. However, it was just doing what was to be done to her. For her, Trump's survival was more than simply another crazy political event. It was a declaration. It demonstrated that even in the face of the world's attempts to bring you down, you might remain upright by tenacity, resolve, and plain stubbornness. What was her argument for quitting if he could take a bullet and carry on? Let's be honest, though. It wasn't easy to return to politics while caring for a newborn. She was battling reporters at the White House podium one moment. The next day, she questioned whether her child even recognized her appearance. It's awful that she leaves her child every day. It breaks your heart, she said. Did she slow down, though? No way. She simply wasn't like that. She had a hidden weapon, to be honest. She is married to Nicholas Riccio. The man was the glue that held things together behind the scenes, but he wasn't one for the limelight. He was at home making sure their son was fed, taken care of, and presumably not already planning his breakout from the crib while she dealt with the insanity of Washington. She was fortunate that he was able to step up in ways that most people would never see because of his business career. Although the nation had been rocked by the assassination attempt, she saw it as a gut check. It brought to mind the reasons behind her decision and the sacrifices she made for things that most people would take for granted. And why it was just not an option to step away. She wasn't simply keeping her composure when she faced the media a few days after one of the most horrifying events in contemporary politics. She was going all out. However, no one anticipated that underneath her cool-headed facade, something more intimate would surface. In addition to juggling politics and parenting, she was ready to reveal something shocking about her spouse that would make everyone take notice. These days, every interaction in the political sphere is examined as if it were a detective case. What about her union with Nicholas Rio? People's eyebrows were raised. But unlike the typical DC power couple pairings, theirs wasn't predicated on political connections or professional advancements. One of those stuffy, high-energy events when everyone shakes hands, makes power moves, and acts like they're not tired is where they met at a political event. She was already in her element and on the rise. Rio, a real estate tycoon with more wealth than most people could imagine, was not interested in getting involved in politics. The man seldom ever spoke to reporters, much less gave a damn about headlines. Nevertheless, something clicked when a mutual acquaintance introduced them. They didn't make sense on paper. She was youthful, driven, and loved being in the spotlight. He was 32 years older, social media phobic, and unconcerned with the most recent Twitter controversy. In a world when Instagram followers are essentially used to gauge success, he had none. For the sake of tradition, don't use LinkedIn, Twitter, or even a Facebook profile. That was unprecedented for someone with his degree of power. They perceived balance where others saw a mismatch. She created waves and commanded rooms. He was the taciturn tactician. Very good sideline observation. They had more than one unusual connection. It was the type that prompted conversation. Some people didn't understand. Some people adored it. However, it just worked for them. It kept coming up in conversation. The age difference was more than a casual remark. It turned to become the topic of discussion. Opinions, and not the subtle ones, were all over social media. It was referred to as opportunistic. Others questioned its veracity. The comments section opened up whenever she shared a photo of herself with Rio. "Is that your father?" Someone made fun of it. Another struck the target squarely. "You criticize everyone else, even though your husband may be your grandfather?" She wouldn't have it, though. No theatrical clapbacks or drawn-out defenses, just calm, unwavering confidence. She wrote, "He's the best man I've ever met, the best dad, and my biggest fan." They had no concept who they were dealing with if they believed they could shame her into silence. She and Rio were busy living their lives in secret, purposefully, and without the need for an audience, while the internet scrutinized every action they took. No magazine covers or ostentatious demonstrations. Just two individuals who were well aware of their possessions. That was even the rhythm of their interaction. No gimmicks on Christmas Day, 2023, in their house. She responded to his question, and that was all. She posted a picture of Rio on one knee the following day, with a diamond gleaming in the winter sunlight. "My favorite Christmas ever. I get to wed the man I've always wanted." No show, no theatrical feeling, only true happiness. It was the same during their wedding. Their ceremony was completely out of the public spotlight, in contrast to the majority of political leaders who choose to have elaborate, attention-grabbing celebrations. No exclusives, no publicity, and no unidentified, enigmatic sources disclosing information. She didn't even publicize her nuptials on social media. She only needed to add the word wife to her amended bio. They were not slowed down by the marriage. It put everything into overdrive. Did she take on one of Rio's most challenging political positions? He continued to operate his real estate business as usual. No attention-seeking incidents, interviews, or the unexpected publication of a memoir titled My Life as a Political Spouse. He remained out of sight, just where he intended to be. However, that did not negate the sense of his presence. People were curious when she surprised everyone by going back to work only 4 days after giving baby. How could that be? Easy, Rio. He was at home making sure their newborn boy had all he needed while she dealt with the media. He was constantly referred to by her as her best ally, the one who provided without expecting anything in return. However, no one recognized the extent of his own sacrifices. There was more to him than the supportive spouse nodding along like a well-dressed extra in the background. It was something far larger. And people finally understood when she eventually broke down and told them the truth about him. Nobody had anticipated what Nicholas Rio had been carrying. He was never meant to be the center of attention. Staying behind the scenes, where he felt most at ease, she created history as the youngest White House press secretary. People thought he was just another successful businessman who had done everything right. But his tale? Nobody anticipated it. The dot next to Rio had nothing, and the dot before the success, the dot before the millions, and the dot before the political influence. Rio was homeless at the age of 18, while most children were worrying about college applications. He lacked a safety net, a backup plan, and his parents' comforting "you can always come home" message. He was alone. Rio spotted a chance, although most individuals in that situation would be preoccupied with surviving. There was no room for failure. He saved every dime he could while working tirelessly without any connections and with very little money. He discovered dilapidated homes near Hampton Beach, New Hampshire, during the early 2000s, places that most people wouldn't give a second glance to. They were a lost cause to everyone else. They were a treasure trove to Rio. He began modestly by purchasing unneeded homes, renovating them, and making them into in-demand rental houses. Every penny he earned was reinvested in his company. He had constructed something tangible by 2005. 70 rental apartments, 15 buildings, and a reputation for seeing value where others did not. His dominion then grew. Rio Enterprises LLC, his business, operates throughout New England. He employed the same tactic: locate underutilized areas, transform them into something worthwhile, and never go overboard. He was already a multi-millionaire by the time they found out his name. This is the bit that no one anticipated, though. Making money was not the only goal of his properties. They developed into more than just a meeting spot. They were a silent but potent influence in conservative circles. He was moving as others were making noise. But despite everything, he never sought attention, never felt the need to prove anything, and never stepped into the spotlight. The most powerful individuals are never the ones who create the greatest commotion. Without anybody noticing, they are the ones tugging the strings. Instead of Nicholas Rio, most men in his situation would be flaunting their money and making sure everyone knew who they were. Rio was discreetly shifting pieces behind the scenes as other real estate tycoons spoke to Ted about the hustle and standing next to their private aircraft. He was more concerned with outcomes than influence. And in some way, that added to his intrigue. For instance, consider one of his properties. It wasn't simply another investment in real estate. It developed to become a center for conservative women, including influential women for Trump events. Rio, however, wasn't just a wealthy benefactor who sat at his office making checks. As a strategist, he made sure that his accomplishments had purpose. Rio handled it differently than the millionaires, who couldn't help but mention their political ties. No magazine covers, no interviews, and no well-planned Instagram postings. The man was seldom visible on the internet. It was nearly amazing. He also remained in the background for some time. Until he was thrust into the public eye by his marriage to Karoline Leavitt. Not voluntarily, of course. Their age difference caused social media to go crazy. The remarks were brutal. Speculation, criticism, and the insistence that it must be transactional were all expressed. Here's what they didn't understand, though. Their union was not based on appearances. It was based on mutual respect, common beliefs, and the knowledge that domestic stability was a given in their society. Rio made sure their home life remained just that, home, while Karoline took on one of the most demanding governmental positions. And he didn't think twice when their kid, Nicholas Robert, was born. He left his empire because he wanted to, not because he was forced to. Changing priorities wasn't a big sacrifice for a man who had started with nothing. That's what you do when you're really committed. Regardless of Rio's efforts to evade notice, the truth eventually caught up with him. Even the most seasoned political insiders were taken aback when Karoline eventually revealed what he had done. The same question was posed for weeks. How is she handling this? How could she balance a demanding job, a baby, and the constant demands of public life without going totally insane? 4 days after giving birth, she had gone back to work. Others questioned how she was handling it at all, while others referred to it as inspiring. Then everything broke one day. Karoline was poised, professional, and every inch the press secretary as she stood in front of a room full of reporters when she abruptly stumbled. She inhaled deeply, regained her composure, and suddenly nobody could see her coming. So she removed the mask. "A lot of people have asked me how I've juggled this career, being a new mother, and all of that," she added. She spoke in an unusually raw tone. "The fact is, without my hubby, I could not have accomplished any of this." The man who had been hiding in the shadows for years suddenly became unavoidable. Despite all of the conjecture around their connection, nobody had a complete understanding of the situation. Nicholas Rio was more than simply a quiet political influence or a prosperous businessman. He made sure her work wouldn't cause their family to disintegrate. It was then that Karoline explained the extent of his sacrifice. Rio had made a decision long before their baby was even born. No political strategists suggested it, and no headlines reported it. He took the necessary action. When Karoline went back to work, he took a step back, adjusted his whole schedule, and made sure their family didn't skip a beat. She acknowledged that Nicholas didn't hesitate when I told him I wanted to get back to work as soon as possible. "We'll work it out," he simply stated, and he did. She discussed the guilt, the pain of daily separation from her kid, and how there were times when it was intolerable. And each time Rio was present, he took action rather than just giving vacuous platitudes or giving a hazy motivational speech. "This is made feasible for me by the knowledge that Nicholas is with his father and that he is there at every turn." The storyline abruptly shifted after that. Nicholas Rio was more than simply the mysterious husband in the background or a successful businessman. The entire operation was successful because of him. Indeed, he had established an empire, but his greatest contribution, the one thing that really made him unique, was the money he had been donating covertly every day without anticipating anything in return. The news conference that followed was the turning point. Known for her poise, Leavitt broke down in tears as she revealed how much her husband sacrificed for their family. The standard political script was abandoned at that point. This has nothing to do with rivalry or one person's career taking precedence over another. It was about working together as a team and genuinely supporting one another. Naturally, the media had a great time. Was she imposing an unachievable expectation on working mothers? Or was she demonstrating that powerful women don't have to decide between family and ambition? Leavitt and Rio demonstrated that true success is about who supports you in a society where having power frequently comes at a price. And perhaps, just possibly, their tale may encourage others to reconsider what real collaboration entails.